Hi, a very good morning and good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are at. I'm Stephen, and on behalf of IQPC, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, and to thank all of you in the audience for joining us today at BFSI Transformation Interactive, made possible by Expleo. Today, we will be touching on mitigating the risk and accelerating the ISO 20022 migration to achieve a seamless, real-time, high-value, and cross-border payment journey. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our expert speaker for today, Manikandan, who is an experienced executive with over 15 years of experience in the cards and payment world, supporting global banks in their payments transformation journey. Currently, he is the head of cards and payment at Expleo Solution, and his practice includes driving consulting engagement and new solution development. Mani also leads the Expleo initiative in quality assurance strategy towards the emerging trends in the cards and payment space, covering ISO 20022, instant payments, PMI changes, digital transformations, and API banking. Mani also supports the transformation journey for major banking, financial services, and insurance institutions across the globe. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the room over to Mani Kandan. Mani, over to you. Screen clear.
Thank you, Steven.
No.
So, without further ado, let me start it out. So, very good morning to all. Maybe it's afternoon or evening. I can see lots of people are joined from multiple time zones. So, I trust you and your loved ones are safe and having a great social distance time. On behalf of Expleo, I would like to extend a warm welcome to everyone who has joined the virtual series from APAC, the Middle East, and the other parts of Asia. We truly appreciate your interest, and it's an absolute pleasure for hosting you today. As Stefan explained, I'm Manikandan and lead the cards and payments practice for Expleo. And we are joined by our partner, George Ching, who is a business development director from Expleo. As part of this webinar, we'll be focusing on the topic ISO 20022 implementation for the domestic and international payments compliance. Before we are getting the ball rolling, there are a few things that I would like to touch upon very briefly. Today, along with Expleo, Expleo will discuss on the market trends that's fueling the migration, the best practices for ISO 20022 implementation, the use cases from the global institution who are already taken the journey along the implementation. So during the poll of this webinar or the course of this webinar, we'll be running around 4 poll questions, and you'll find the poll questions flashing with the support from Stefan. And please ensure saying that you are answering them so that it helps us to serve you better, know your needs much better. So we can assure you that your response to the poll will be kept confidential. And also, if you have any queries, as Stefan informed, use the Q&A section effectively. And we'll be monitoring the section continuously, and be rest assured that either me or George will be responding to your questions at the end of the Q&A session of this webinar. With this webinar, with a quick introduction on Expleo. So Expleo is a trusted partner for end-to-end integrated engineering, quality services, and management consulting for digital transformations. We are recognized as a global leader by Nelson Hall and a challenger by Gartner. We are active in 30 countries with 15,000 professionals, generating around 1.1 billion in revenue, and strong offshoring capabilities in India, Egypt, and Romania. And Expleo Solutions is a subsidiary. I think it's from the wider umbrella of Expleo. Has an expertise in several areas, including quality assurance, performance engineering, cybersecurity, software development, DevOps, data and cloud migration. And Expleo Solutions, though has a wider horizon of service, we have a dedicated practice with a specific focus to BFSI sectors. With the banking, treasury and capital markets, insurance, cards and payments, and asset management, which is pretty much focused in these areas. And just to get back to Expleo, our partner Expleo is a world leader in financial messaging, and they provide simulation, validation services, and legacy bridge solutions for new schemes and adoption of new formats for multiple tribes across the globe. So thank you, and George as a representative from Expleo. George, thank you for joining us, and have a quick view on how this ISO 20022 or this XML messaging has evolved. It's very imperative that just have a brush up on how it has evolved before we going further. So as you see, traditionally the international transfers were being done through telex messages, and the SWIFT network was evolved to collaboration with multiple entities somewhere in 1970s. And SWIFT came up with the standard of empty standards in 1974, and it has evolved all the way by implementing ISO standards like ISO 7775 or ISO 50022 on the way. And the 15022 is a predominant standard which is being used even now by the major payment infrastructures in the world for payment messaging. And in 2004, SWIFT introduced the standard ISO, not SWIFT, ISO introduced the standard ISO 20022, which is predominantly based on XML messaging, or it can be also a JSON format. But as you know, from 2004, it has been in the arena for adoption, but the amount of adoption were on the slower pace until SEPA. SEPA came up with the implementation in 2008. I don't know whether you know it. ISO 20022, which is being a successor of 15022, it's also called as the version 2.0 of 50022. So when Europe launched the SEPA payments in 2008, they were the first to deploy the payment for ISO 20022 standard for the mass payment transactions. So it's worth to note saying that every domestic payment or the instant payments or the faster payments of the world, which is being introduced in the recent past, are on the ISO 20022 payment rails. So just take for example the Australia New Payments Platform (NPP), the UPI in India, or G3 in Singapore. All these, the latest one, I think the introduction of instant payments in Saudi Arabia, they are on the ISO 20022 payment rate. So this gives you a pretty much view saying that though it was dormant for some time, the adoption has gathered pace in the recent past. So it's time for every payment institution to look forward and take this migration journey towards ISO 20022. So just to go ahead, we look at the drivers that's making the financial institutions to move forward. But before that, let's have a quick brush up on the benefits, which is promised by the ISO 2022. So first, I think we have given a common myth that we have encountered or we have been questioned by multiple banks or businesses around the world. So ISO 200 migration is a simple messaging change. Why it's so complex? But as I said, the fact is that it might look like a simple message change, but the impact of this small message change or a small change in format has a wider impact across the ecosystem of the payment life cycle. So we'll get to that shortly, where I'll be able to give you more information, the areas that's impacted. But before that, just have in mind saying that it's not a simple message. That's a fact. Message transformation or something, that's a fact you have to keep it in mind. So moving ahead on the benefits. So if I go for the benefits, multiple benefits has been just flashed on your screen. But I would like to take the first two ones, the richer payments data and the interoperability. I would like to coin this word, these two, as the driving factors of this change or driving benefits, and others will be the benefits, I'll say. Because when I say richer payments data, ISO 2022 is going to give you highly structured fields, which is highly formatted, and it's also promising you expanded transaction identifiers. And it also has additional party information, which is going to give you more space or more power in you, so that you will be able to mention all the parties involved in the payment chain in your messages. And also it has extended remittance information. So these are some of the examples which is going to help you to visualize how rich the payments data will be. And let's assume a scenario saying that all the payments infrastructures of the world are migrating to ISO 2022. So see the benefit that you're going to for interoperability. There is no need of message truncation or changing from one message format to other. It will be a seamless flow of payment data across the life cycle or across the complete payment chain from the initiation to the recipient. So in that case, it will improve your straight through processing rates, or it could be improve your reconciliation, etc., etc. So these two are the main benefits based on my understanding, and everything else will be the derivatives. For example, if you take the next one, improved operations efficiency, it's based on the new data, the extensive data, and the common format. And also, if you take the value-added services, you are being promised with new return status messages, so that the customers will get the instant response on the status of their payments. Also, it supports special characters, even emojis. So it improves the customer satisfaction. Now, also, we should not forget the fact saying that the fraud, the online fraud, because of the digitization, has increased drastically, and every payment regulators are emphasizing on the fact saying that effective fraud detection. So, more data or more information available for fraud detection enhances the bank's ability to detect fraud as early as possible. So, these are the typical benefits that's promised by ISO 2022. Now, maybe as this you see in the screen, just popped up a couple of examples that you can see saying that ISO 2022 is going to give you more space to give information of your account numbers. More, and with respect to address, you can see saying that you are going to get a structured way of addressing, so you can extract the information much better for processing. So it will reduce your reconciliation problems within the banks. And these are the typical message level advantages. Let us get to the fact of some business use cases that you can come upon. Quickly saying that this promises use case of vendor payments. Very simple example, where a vendor will be able to make a single payment across multiple invoices rather than making X number of payments for Y number of invoices. No longer needed. They can have a single payment with all the invoice information available in the same payment messages. And fund disbursement, of course. A corporate can make a fund disbursement for a number of accounts based on single payment messages, based on the richness of data that supports promised by ISO 2022. E-invoicing, this is another interesting example. Maybe it can be applicable for insurance industries also, any service industries. So they can send the invoices to their customers, and the customer can use these e-invoices and make the payment with reference to the invoice. That eases the reconciliation process across the life cycle. So these are some of the use cases that I would like to touch upon this ISO 2022. And to go forth, maybe I'll request George to come up and give some insights on the drivers that are pushing the ISO 2022 adoption shortly. So before that, Stefan, can I request you to bring up the first poll? So that which of these best signifies your ISO 2022 migration journey? Whether you're just embarked or you're going to start the implementation process midway through it or successfully implemented it. Have a clear winner here. So 46% has noted saying that they are just embarked the journey on the preparation phase. And good number of followed by midway through implementation and about the start. So predominantly it's on the just embarked. So it's good. So we are going to touch base multiple areas on the how you have to progress, what are the different challenges to help you along. George, it's over to you. Just share your thoughts on the drivers that's making are fueling the movements towards ISO 2022.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to you from London, from cold, rainy England, as you would expect. I'm with Expleo. We are in financial messaging. We work with all kinds of financial messaging formats, including ISO 20022, and Manny mentioned the migration in Europe to ISO 20022 standards when SEPA was introduced in Europe, and we were instrumental in helping many banks make that transition. And also we work with banks to assist their customers in transitioning to ISO 20022 for testing and simulation and all kinds of support tools. I think the next slide, why is it time to act now? I think in our experience, many banks have underestimated the effort that's involved in getting ready to operate based on ISO 20022 standards. As Manny said, it's more than just a data format or a message format. The ability to transport and process additional data really tends to help your customers deal with some of the challenges they are facing. And some of the drivers are listed on this slide. You can see there's a regulatory and compliance aspect. More data allows you to provide more transparency to your regulators. It allows your customers to automate their processes. So in my career, I've been doing this for 35 years or more. And corporate customers especially have a challenge to efficiently and quickly reconcile payments and try to automate their treasury operations. So introducing ISO 20022 from a bank's perspective, it helps your customers, and Manny also mentioned, it also enables you to develop new and better products in your payments space. Payment tracking, new services I just mentioned. And at the end, I think one of the key drivers for adoption of ISO 20022 is customer experience. I think we can go to the next slide, and I can cover some of these points in a little more detail. I mentioned regulatory and technical change. End customer demands, the current generation of treasury professionals have expectations that we did not have, say, 30 years ago or even 20 years ago. The move to XML enables corporate treasurers to look at ways to make their payments processing more efficient, especially for cross-border payments. And ISO 20022 also supports updates and upgrades in technology as we move more to edge computing and away from sort of mainframe-based batch processing. And many banks face this challenge as well. End customer experience, I mentioned that. One key point, clearing infrastructures or payment service operators, such as the Bank of England, such as the NACHA in the US and other schemes around the world, are looking to open their systems to more participants, including fintechs, including non-traditional or non-bank participants, again, that we did not have, say, 20 years ago. And opening the infrastructure provides a greater breadth and depth of services to end users in the marketplace, and also provides for greater efficiency and ultimately safety of critical infrastructure. Time to market is key for banks. If you want to introduce new services, you want to be able to do it quickly. You also want to, if you are onboarding new customers, or if your customers are making changes in their systems, you want to be able to test and bring them on board quickly so you can get the revenue in faster. So these are some of the key points. If any of you have questions on any of these, we can come back to these. And I'll turn it back over to Manny.
Thank you, George. Thank you for your insightful discussion. And just to add to George, let's maybe also try to break out one of the myth what we have heard this. ISO 20022, the deadlines by CBPR Plus has been moved by a year, and there is a coexistence period of 3 years. What's the urgency for being compliant? So the answer to that is yes, you rightly said, saying that CBPR Plus has a coexistence period and the bank has time for 3 years to fully be compliant to it, so that as SWIFT is going to support both the messaging in this 3 years period. But always it has to be read in conjunction with your domestic HVPS systems. For example, though SWIFT is having a 22 or 2025, Singapore MEPS Plus, as per the latest information received, is they are having a timeline of June 2022, and Philippines PhilPass 21, and Malaysia is also having. So major of these locals payment market infrastructures are going for a big bang approach, not staggered approach like SWIFT. No. So as long as these are in place, it's imperative that the bank has to look this in conjunction with the SWIFT and plan their migration across. So based on maybe if you look at a history of SEPA implementation, one of the studies shows that the typical timeline for implementation is somewhere between 18 to 36 months based on the complexity of the infrastructure. So all this has to be bear in mind before you're planning for it, because you need that time. Because as George rightly mentioned, many of the banks has identified simple, but you need the time required to address these complexities along the journey. So this has to be bear in mind whenever you're planning something or this volume for migration, so that you'll be able to achieve the full benefits of it. Then let me quickly proceed with the next one. So this is what the details of the first myth that we discussed, right? It's not a simple change of messages or simple mapping of messages. If you see, whenever life cycle of a payments, like from the payment initiation where you are going to involve your channels, and then it goes to the payment hub or payment systems for its processing, and then overall onto this infrastructures or the schemes for the processing. So at every juncture, right from your payment initiation, where the bank can decide to change their channels to capture the data then and there. That's what is marked as a potential one. The bank can decide to it, and they can have a better initiation management. But bank can also saying that they have to mandately change their messages received. For example, it's in the traditional formats of MT 101 or so. Once this is message initiated, they have to mandatorily enrich these messages with the mandatory tags of ISO 2022 or CBPR plus or HVPS plus. So that change has to be starts from there. Then it goes to the payment system where the extensive data that's being promised by has to be stored in your system. So there's a change in your infrastructure or where the data is being handled, and you might have to change your auto repair rules or just saying that add additional rules for your auto repair or change the rules to handle the new data. You might have to handle that. And of course the controls, because we have seen many banks, I think currently the banks that you're working with us, initially they are not going to go for the change in rules for now. They're still going to handle with the say old one, but still it's on the cards for them, saying that they have to change their way their controls, like the filtering rules, or it could be a AML transaction monitoring. Everything has to go for a change to handle this extensive data or additional information passed on by the ISO 2022. Obviously, then you have to have a constant plan for message generation and validation. You might have to build your ISO 20000 message, or you have to rebuild it or convert back to empty. All this has to come into picture, play a major role across your ecosystem. So it's not a simple change. Majority of your payment, maybe it could be a process or it could be a payment model in your system. Everything will go for a change or potentially will go for a change. Mandatorily, not everything will go for a change, but it's always better to analyze and understand what's in it for the bank. It depends on what banks want to achieve in ISO 2022. So this has to bear in mind before planning for anything or proceeding further for the migration journey. And I think we'll quickly go to the second poll. Stefan, can you just pop up the second one? Replacing your existing engine is the only complaint solutions. It is, I'll say, saying that it's one of the approaches, but there are other approaches available, but it has its own advantage or disadvantage. We'll look into it shortly. So the first one, I think we have going to discuss around 3 approaches widely discussed in the industries, and it's being adopted by multiple banks in the Europe who have already embarked on this journey. The first one is the translation approach. It's if you see, it's very simple. The conversion services, it performs a function of translating one message format to other, say from MT 103 to ISO 2022. I think George, that's what mentioning, saying that they are doing this support for multiple, even in the multiple banks during even in the SEPA implementation. So this one of the adoption methodology used by the banks predominantly, but let me tell you some more information on that to help you to decide. So the data manipulation, the advantage is that it ensures that the technical interoperability between the legacy formats and ISO 2022 format is intact. You are staying compliant. Still, you are not changing anything on your payment hub or any other channels. It stays intact. So who goes for it? I think banks with very high complex systems, and they don't have time to do it now. One, and they are not. They are just very low volume transactions. They are not predominantly into the payments area. And also the other interesting part is some of the banks who have recently upgraded the system, they have modernized the system already. In that case, if they go for again a change, it will increase the sunk cost, because they had some plans to migrate, and again a change will increase the sunken. So some banks, because certain banks will go for this based on this. And an interesting thing is there is a study done by Europe Economics Analysis after the SEPA implementation. It says that from the complete respondents, I mean the survey done from all the banks, around 13% of the banks has gone for this conversion services. It's nice to know it. Only that, I think it's the other way to look at it, is only 13% has gone for this conversion services. But there's an interesting twist to it. I'll come to it in a short while. The second approach you have to look at is the strategic approach. It is nothing but you are going to change your complete payment hub or payment systems. So the complete change of the internal systems of payments, so that they are completely capable of handling the XML messages, which is richer in formats. It's impressive. But this attractiveness, opposed to the conversion services, is favored by most of the banks, and it offers them opportunity for the complete payments modernization, which makes them future proof. And it's also favored by corporates and banks with multinational operations, because they take this as an opportunity to centralize payments. And multinational corporates are also looking to streamline this. For example, one of the banks that you're working with are having a presence in Europe across, they are having a processing the payments for 3 or 4 countries in Europe, and they have separate payment hubs. So they are taking this opportunity predominantly to streamline this process to have a single payment hub. There are 2 advantages to it. This will reduce the need for investing in transforming their multiple systems. They are going to converge everything into a single system, so that the amount of time, money spent on modernizing 3 different systems is getting reduced. And also multinational banks are looking at consolidating the payment hub for each regions. For example, Europe, they can have a single payment hub for consolidated payments. In APAC, it could be in single one. Multinationals are also looking for that. And if you again go back to the data from SEPA, what the learnings from SEPA is, around 75% of the respondents said that they are going for the change in internal systems. But it has its own disadvantages. What is it? It's time consuming. As I said, the impact is huge. It's time consuming. So the bank needs to plan well ahead if you are going for the complete change or modernization of the system before the deadline. It needs time. As I said, the typical time is from 18 to 36 months. You might need the full 36 months or beyond, if you, based on the complexity of the system, to adapt it completely. So what's the other one which banks can adopt? The third one being the modular approach, which is nothing but it's the most favored approach, which is nothing but it's a combination of your conversion approach and it is on the migration approach, where you are going with the conversion services initially, so that you are compliant first. The conversion service being deployed for handling your incoming payments and outgoing payments initially, so that you are staying compliant. And once you are compliant in line with all the payment infrastructures, first go with the timeline of, let's take Singapore. Let's take the timeline of MEPS Plus first, be compliant with that, followed by Swift CBPR, be compliant with that. Once it is done, the bank can take its own time for strategically planning the changes of your internal systems. And the translators are available. As George said, the converters are available in the market, which can take part or help you to convert the message internally wherever you need. For example, you're not ready with your changes with respect to your initiation channels. I can have a converter there. It converts it to the pain messages required, or the message XML is not accepted fraud systems. Yes, I can get it converted. So this converters will play a major role there for, it can also help you that. So this is one of the modular approach used by the banks. And if you see another example saying that same SEPA, among the respondents who have as a conversion, it said that 33% have used only for temporary basis. Everyone has switched back from conversion to full-fledged migration. So it's something has to bear in mind. This is a predominant, I think, as I said, one of the banks that you're working in Europe is predominantly going for it. So they are taking it slowly, saying that based on, if I take an example of Europe, they are taking the timeline of first, they are going for the CHAPS implementation first, going with the CHAPS to T2 target implementation, followed by the Swift CBPR plus. They are going for compliance first. Then they have plans to change their systems, consolidating the systems from multiple countries, single payment hub. All these plans are there, strategically planned and in place, so that they can take it slowly. Once they are compliant, half of the work, maybe I say 30% of the work is done, you are compliant. So your business is not interrupted. You can go ahead with it. Because, so that's a main thing that I want to drive it out. Now, going forth, I
I
hope if there is any question. Yeah, George, please.
I just want to mention one thing, and Manny has alluded to this. You can approach this challenge as a technical challenge. Say, oh, okay, we continue to operate our business just with different formats. I don't believe that's the correct approach. The correct approach is to take a strategic approach, because the benefits of using ISO 20022 messaging only come when you pass those on to your customers. I think it's important to take a strategic approach, and it's very important to help your senior management to the top of the organization understand the benefits of the migration, what it brings you, and getting that buy-in at senior levels will help you to take a strategic approach and a long-term approach. You have to take things step by step, as Manny has said, and we have tools, and Expleo and XMLdation have tools to help you do that. But ultimately, this is a strategic exercise, and it is already starting to transform the way banks and their customers are working in the payment space.
Thank you, George. Thank you for adding that. Maybe as a follow-up question, George, maybe it will be helpful. Maybe I'll pull in George shortly to share his insights on it. And let's go through now. We know saying that what are the methodologies available for the banks to go ahead with the migration. Now, how the bank should approach. Now the decision is taken, how the bank should approach. So we would like to we would coin this as a 3P strategy, which will a bank can take or bank has to take or plan their migration journey. So, George, may I request you to maybe as a follow-up question, so what you've added from the plan, say, I think it's a plan, prepare, and prove. So we personally believe saying that the planning is everything. Once you have a plan in place, it's just the execution is going to happen. So plan is one which has to be done very strategically, as John explained. So, Judge, maybe you can add a bit more on what do you think the planning area the bank has to be concentrate or strategically to approach this migration.
Well, once you start to look at how, as a bank, when you look at how you are actually processing messages, and you start to compare that with the options that you have using ISO 20022, our experience in projects with banking clients is that the first thing you do is you learn a lot about your own organization and your own processes and your own systems. It's almost like it's an opportunity for you to learn about how your own systems and your own processes are really working. And many banks, and it's a natural thing, many banks have been operating for a long time based on the current SWIFT standards or local payment format standards. But again, I think it's important to take a strategic view and embrace the opportunity to look at your business very fundamentally. And this has been our experience, and the banks that we've worked with have had some great benefits from this process.
Thank you, George. Before I'm proceeding, maybe I missed a point. The poll question, the second poll question, it said that the challenges that the banks are facing with respect to legacy systems. Okay, so that's what we explained in the third approach, saying that legacy system will have its limitations, and legacy systems will have its own time required for analysis and upgradation. So most of the banks are taking this approach, or the other modular approach, to tame the beast. For example, what's the immediate need for it to be compliant? That's some of the approach the banks are taking towards before proceeding with a complete change of legacy system. And we have to take the help of the tools available to make sure, saying that it serves as a bridge between the needs or the lacking of your legacy systems, because the legacy system is not able to do certain things. So there are adapters available, which could be an external adapter, or it could be.
Yeah, this is what we call a bridge solution. It allows you to continue to operate using your legacy processes, but accommodates the new format. However, this is in my view only a first step.
Yes, of course. So legacy, these challenges could be clearly addressed with these tools and solutions available. So that's what we can go ahead. So just to maybe to continue with George Watts, emphasize the need for a clear plan. So one point I would like to add to is, as George maybe mentioned previously, but I would like to emphasize again, saying that the buy-in from the management, because this is cost intensive, resource intensive. So there has to be clear buy-in from the management and a clear understanding and conviction from the management to, so that there'll be a smooth flow along this journey. So because this project 100%, most of the banks are running this migration in parallel with other initiatives that has been in the plan for quite some time. So these are resource intensive and a client conviction are there. And as George said, once the plan is done, though, we have to prepare for it. So we have to have a detailed business impact assessment of your systems, or it could be saying that understand your function. As George said, this might be eye opener for many banks. That's been eye opener. Right? We have been in the business for one of the banks we are working with. We are engaging with them from their assessment phase, analyzing the payment messages and creating a mapping of the payment messages to ISO 2022. So we find saying that there are issues in mapping and we have to change some processes in. So we are working along with the business users to understand that, and working with the PMIs to understand how the mapping works. So all this will be eye opener. So this is a mandatory thing that has to be done by each and every bank to understand what needs to be changed from the business impact and the technological impact. Everything has to be taken into account, like your data storage capacity, or who are the vendors you want to work with, whether it could be a technical vendor or a vendor who's going to give you resourcing, or it could be a quality assurance vendor, or in the quality space, in quality engineering vendor, anything like Expleo. So you have to be clear on the tools requirement. So everything has to be strategically planned, understood, so that we are not into any surprises in the future. We can take strategy decisions saying that we are going with it, we know the risk, but it's always better to analyze and understand the risk before going forward. And third one, okay, everything is done. What to next? Next is pilot to prove. Everyone has to be proven that whatever we have done is correct. In that, we have to ensure saying that effective testing methodology with the right mix of maybe it could be automation or it could be other tools, everything is in place so that we can effectively prove that the system works and make it compliant. Because the strategic thing of any payment testing is taking into account the need for compliance and understanding the complexity of the system, for which you need to know the system. That's where experts like Expleo or Examulation will come into picture, who have been in the business and know the payments world much better. So they'll be we'll be able to help you in understanding this better and lay a perfect plan of testing or managing your complete migration. And just to a recommendation we would like to make, saying that we want to recommend a 4-phaser. It should be a static testing where you prove that your message conversion or your message simulation tools are working as expected in line with things. So this will avoid the need of or avoid, I'll say, it's a demarcate the issues related to messages and the actual functional issues. So we recommend that. Or also for one of the banks in Europe that you work with, a static testing, not on the messaging but the requirements, have unearthed around 34% of the requirement gaps, which would have been potentially a big impact on the system as early as possible. So it needs knowledge of the systems to statically analyze it and come up with the gaps as early as possible. Then go with system testing, where you are using stubs for your testing rather than integration, like tools of converters, or it could be simulators, anything. And go with the integration testing systematically so that functions are tested. Now the integration issues alone comes up. Go with the final functional acceptance testing. Go with the industry certificate testing, and finally the non-functional testing, because it's going to be intensive. The amount of data the system is going to handle. We cannot take a risk with respect to the response time of messages. No, it's not the ask. As George rightly mentioned earlier, saying that customer expectations are huge. It's on the the response time has to be reduced, not increased. It's not the expectation. So we have to work on the non-functional testing. Finally, we cannot take it light, saying the staff has to be trained on the change process, how they have to work, because this change is also going to impact your customer service screens at the also. For example, they have to work with the new fields. They have to query the messages with new fields. There is a need for it. So you have to plan for that also. So any doubts on this, maybe you can, as George said, add to the Q&A. To proceed further, okay, I think it's a final poll that we are going to have. which of these would help you in the fast tracking of implementation? Are you looking for payment experts, or you are looking for just the tools and process that will help you to accelerate your journey, or you are looking for automation frameworks, which is going to reduce your time for implementation, because time is always the essence there in any implementation. Time is never enough. So you have to be smart in that area. Or you can just raise your questions in the Q&A based on your need. Because as we discussed earlier, it's not always these lists. The list will always be huge, but we want to be concise as much as possible. So please feel free to give your answers. Oh, that's interesting. So all the above is the one. So it's not one thing anymore. It's all the above. Good to know that. So
I like that.
So obviously, so I can understand saying that you are looking, maybe everyone are looking at a complete package solution rather than individual solutions. Everything is needed. The ultimate aim is to get the implementation done successfully, whatever be the solution. That's interesting to know. So to proceed further, I think again it goes for hang. Sorry. Yes. So let us quickly touch base on the impediments. Impediments is nothing but what could be the potential issues that you could face during the implementation. So let us quickly go through some. I think we have touched base some of the items in the during our discussion. So, but let's go ahead with addressing some of the one. Domain expertise and the scope of impacted systems go hand in hand. As we rightly said, saying that earlier we discussed, you need persons who know the system, or it could be the business. Yes, business knows the system better, but similarly saying that you need the extra hands required for analysis, because it's, as I said, it's resource intensive. So you need people, because based on the survey done for SEPA, this is one of the main challenges that's raised by the banks who have gone at SEPA. They had difficulties in understanding the payment messages or the standards given by the payment market infrastructure. So they needed support from independent parties or other experts for helping them to understand it, to analyze the system better, to understand scope, what is the scope for change. This is one of the main challenges that's came out during discussion with the banks. Next one, the lack of internal resources or limited resources and parallel implementation. Yes, as I rightly said earlier, this is not one of them. The banks has multiple projects running in parallel. So whenever this running in parallel, always there is a crunch on resourcing available for the banks. So this has to plan ahead during the, as George said, during the strategy being planned, we have to be aware saying that we will come up with the risk. So you should augment it with a good partnership with vendors who knows the business and who will be able to support you with the right resources at the right time. So you should have this in mind before planning for anything. So just two things I have in mind, saying that this, we have to have a conviction that this is resource intensive. You need resources. You will not be able to do it everything. Banks were not. That's a fact. They're not able to do it everything on their own. That's the reason they depend on other vendors. But it's imperative that we plan for it, we identify it ahead so that the journey will be smooth. And other one is system and operational glitches. So as he right said, there are possibilities and we cannot take a risk with respect to the system glitches, because the payment has to go through. Let's assume a CBPR Plus is going for a what is it, the coexistence phase, where you will be able to support both, but it's not all systems. When you are going for a big bang approach, you don't get a chance to fall back to other format at all. You have to be compliant. So it's imperative that you have enough time, plan enough time for testing and make sure your system is up and running in production. So you should have a clear plan for it and enough time. That's very important. You have to plan for enough time for this. And this is one of the challenges that's posed by the banks during early implementation. Or even, it's never ending challenge. We can, let's understand the fact. Time is always a challenge, but let's agree to it. Let's plan for it perfectly so that you have a smooth implementation. And as you write, running parallel with legacy. Yes, This is one of the challenge days. You will have issues running parallel with legacies, but you should have the right bridging solutions in place so that you mitigate the risk as much as possible when you are running with legacy systems. And other one is resourcing also is one of the things where if you're starting early, the amount of options you have will be limited. You have to go with whatever you have, because if you say every bank in every region has to go for it, so the amount of resources they have to take will be minimal, or they have multiple options but do not have time to do the due diligence and take the right solutions. That could be a challenge. You have to keep it in mind, that so that you start early, take your time, plan it properly, and implement it. And the next one is different interpretation of the messaging standards. Yes, because it's not easy, it's challenging. Because George is laughing, so maybe George, maybe do you want to pitch in how this different interpretation help it out?
We have a lot of experience with this particular point. Let's just say to keep it relatively simple, there are absolutely messaging standards for ISO 20022 for all the different functional messages. However, there are many different interpretations of these, and then at a bank level, you also have the opportunity to use the various options in the particular messages to build your own set of services. So we have a lot of experience working with banks in terms of the different, not only the different message types, but also the various interpretations of the messages. And again, to pick up on Manny's point earlier, it's important to go step by step and understand how you can use the ISO 20022 message types to build services to accommodate the customers in the markets that you work in. So I would say, to sum it up, you have a lot of options, you have a lot of choices, and it can seem very challenging, but if you take things step by step and think about what your customers need, I think it will help you.
Thank you, George. Thank you for that. And there are some more things like conversion services. Usually, there is always, I think you should have the right conversion or mapping available, because we had issues in the past saying that a simple problem of incorrect mapping of the error codes or result codes will have an impact. So the proper mapping service with the right support is always mandatory for going ahead. There are some more impediments as listed here, but in the interest of time, maybe I'll stop with whatever we have discussed now. If you have any questions on any of the impediments listed here, please make sure saying that you are adding it to the QA section. We'll try to answer it in very specific. And to go ahead, I think a quick view on how we helped one of the multinational bank for their payment hub implementation. It's it's a huge implementation going across multiple countries like UK, Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, everything, and across Europe. And they are implementing both the SEPA implementation along with the normal empty message. Both were taken in parallel. So the challenges was that it's, maybe you'll know, saying that it's always available in every project, the availability of interfaces, because the bank had multiple interfaces, but due to multiple delays or being the readiness of the interface, always the challenge that you don't have interfaces. So that's why I refer saying that you always have to fall back to the solution, saying that using a simulator. So we went back to using simulators or for payment messages to sub your interfaces and continue the testing. So without any impact to your system, that helped us to progress with the timeline. Obviously, varying message standards. So you need the knowledge and the right tools to simulate these messages, because message simulation, as you can see, we might have to validate simulate around 14,000 plus messages as part of testing. It's not easy. So we need to have the right approach to it, right tools. We used it to simulate, so that, because simulation data is going to the critical challenge for any testing, as you rightly know. So the right approach to a data is going to help you in your testing to fast track it much better. And other one is multiple code drops. Yes, it's imperative. Though you plan for a single code drop initially, but due to multiple issues, we ended up in multiple code drops in the middle, which required extensive regression. How do you do that? Manually? No. So we had our own automated framework available, so that we'll be able to automate the regression part effectively, so that reduce the impact on timeline. Ultimately, the timeline is what we have to look for. So we had to work very closely with the bank to mitigate it out. And what was the accomplishments? Successfully, we were able to process 30,000 plus transaction of the value 300 billion per day after go live. So that's pretty impressive. We are able to achieve it, but it's not easy. The project ran for around 3 years. So we have been associated with the bank for 3 years. So even now, in the current context, we are working with some of the banks now in the ISO 2020. We are engaged with them as early as possible, because getting engaged with them at the earliest possible will help us to plan it much better, because it gives us a time to learn the system, to understand the ecosystem. It's always better to go with that approach. And what is the value add we have given? As I rightly said, we did had a framework for static testing of the requirements, which helped them to identify 35% of the gaps effectively. And we were able to save around 25% of the planning effort. And we have been we employed automated tools for message generation and validation, so which saved around 60% of the efforts. So this was one of the case study that we wanted to highlight. So that it highlights saying the need of tools, right approach, and the right people. It help you to make this journey much smoother. So just to summarize, Expleo will be able to support you in your migration journey in areas like domain consulting, or it could be working along with you for program and project management, and of course the proof part on quality assurance and quality engineering. Ensure saying that you are getting in touch with us for any support in any areas to have a smooth migration. So I think we are pretty much done, and the final poll is coming for you. So that please take this final poll and we can jump into the Q&A session. Why the bank has to go for this? Why we should do this?
Well, the simple answer is because ultimately you have to. But I think the correct, the good answer is that this is an opportunity for the banking industry to modernize the way we, fundamentally it's about data. And fundamentally it's about helping your customers do more with their in their finances. The legacy payment formats were designed in a time when we still used a lot of checks, for example. And I know many markets still use paper-based payments, but electronic payments gives the opportunity to transport so much more information with the payment. And there was a famous banker many years ago who said something very interesting. He said, money is information on the move. And when counterparties, when banks, their customers, and when companies are exchanging payments, what they are actually exchanging is data. And the more data and the more interesting, the richer data you can exchange through a payment mechanism, the more benefit that everyone has. So fundamentally, this is about modernizing the banking system to allow for better and for better exchange of data and information about fundamentally about economic activity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Josh. I hope that answers. And
at the end of the day, it's something we have to do. And again, we outlined some of the benefits and some of the reasons for doing this earlier on. So please take a look and come back to us separately if you want to talk a little more about how you get from where you are now to where you need to be.
okay. Okay, I think let's take another one. I have a question to you, George. Maybe to the point that let me take another one. I think it's it would be, I think it will benefit the bank. One of the questions that it was earlier. Most of the faster payments implemented or being implemented are based on ISO 2222. So will it reduce the complexity of this implementation, or would it be able to reuse the standard? This is one of the questions that was raised earlier. So maybe to answer that, yes, the question is yes. It will help you to understand better. But let's keep it in mind as ISO 20022 is a standard. So the implementation, how the standards being adopted by the payment market infrastructures will change. I will not say it will drastic change. There is change. So it's understand fact there will be change, but the volume of change will be minimal. So once you have an understanding of one PMI changes, it's easy for you to get adapted to other. But it's always get to understand there will be a change. You have to get adapted to this change. It's not an exact copy of one PMI to other. Similar for instant payments. Instant payments, ISO 2020, rather it says as XML, but it also has a version of JSON. Because predominantly the instant payments might be going for the JSON version, not XML. So if your implementation knowledge is on XML, but you might have to have work a bit more on the JSON formats. So the answer is yes, you can reuse, but the extent of reuse varies based on the implementation. And the next one, George, I think quickly I'll take one more with you. Yeah. And the point says the bank should not see this as a minimal compliance by going for the translation service. Okay. But the Swift is offering, for Swift themselves are offering two types of translation service, like the in-flight translation service and the API translation service. What's your recommendation on going for the Swift service? Will that ensure a better compliance, or the bank has to go this on their own? What's your take on that?
Any service that helps you make the transition will hopefully benefit you. The Swift service is allowing banks to do the message translation, but this is, again, I think we talked about this earlier. This is a short-term solution. What ultimately every bank will need to look at their systems and their processes to make the switch to the ISO-based formats, to the XML-based formats, and only this way. And I talked about data before. Only in this way will you be able to take full advantage of the additional capabilities of ISO 20022 to transport richer and more interesting data for your customers. So yes, you can use a translation service to get started, but ultimately you will have to take a deeper look at your systems and processes.
Thank you, George. Just to add, George, is Swift is going to provide this service based on my understanding, saying that they might stop the service at the end of 2025. So it's all should be aligned with your plan for migration. Do you need a tool after 25? What's your plan for migration systems? All depends on that. For the question for that. And I think we are already over time. I would like to close. If there is any questions unanswered, we'll try to make sure saying that we are answering it over mails. If you are not raised something on the Q&A, please ensure or feel free to contact us over mail. We'll try to answer as much as possible to you so that we can speak further on that. So before we, I hope everyone has taken the polls. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope that you are able to found the session informative, and we are able to answer some of the doubts you had with respect to implementation, how you should move forward. If you have any further, as I said, we're happy to support you. Feel free to drop a note or connect with us, share your views on areas where we can collaborate to support you. Finally, stay home, stay safe. Thank you all.
Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Stefan, over to you. If you have any closing notes to be made.
Oh, thank you so much, Mani and George. Wonderful discussion. I mean, like you mentioned, what I wanted to say is, yeah, kind of what you have touched on already. So everyone stay safe. Yes, and we have other interactive discussions as well. And of course, Expleo will be doing another session actually on another event, Future of Insurance. We'll keep a lookout on that session, and we will keep everyone posted. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, and goodbye for now.